segment going. We're going to continue on the theme of trauma today, and we've got a head injury case. So let's begin. I wanted a special thanks to Dr. Jane, Dr. Shibata, and Dr. Vega for a lot of help in putting together this lecture, and Dr. Daisy is going to be co-hosting the lecture. Okay, so let's begin with a case that I had with Dr. Valesky and Dr. Wong. We got beautiful New York City, got the awesome skyline. Here's our patient. I don't know what he's doing up there. Kind of looks like Dr. Ahern to me, I don't know. But he's up there, and there's like a slip, and maybe a railing breaks, and he gets all tumbled, and oh, splat. Ambulance arrives. They go rushing to the scene. Whole group of people crowded around. This is what they see. You can see he's decordicate. He's flexed at the elbows. You see an obvious head trauma. So they're like, "Hello, are you there?" To try to. No, he's not responding. So they decide they should try to intubate. The first one gives it an attempt, and oh no, he couldn't. Too much blood. So the second one says, "I can do it." No, he couldn't do it either. So, never mind. Package the patient up. Let's just bring him over to the hospital. So they come rushing over to beautiful Kings County. They wheel him in, and this is me and my team, and we arrive. So we say, okay, let's do our primary survey. Look at the patient. At this point, he's GCS 3. He's not responding to anything. His eyes aren't opening. He's not moving, and no verbal. We get him on the monitor. This is what we see. He's bradycardic. He's hypertensive. He's bradypneic, and he's got this labored breathing at this point. So it was a pretty bad-looking scene. So right away, we say, let's protect the airway, and yay, successful intubation. Okay. So ABCs look all right for now. Let's go to the secondary survey. So you look down at the patient, and this is what you're seeing on the gurney in front of you. Starting up here, you can see some obvious facial trauma, head trauma. He's got some lax, he's bleeding. You look at his pupils, they're 4 to 5 millimeters bilateral, and they're not really responding to light. He's intubated at this point. He's got a C-collar on. You feel down the spine, no step-offs. Chest, no chest trauma, equal breath sounds. He's got good cardiac motion, belly soft, pelvis good. Lower extremities, he's not moving anything, but he's got good pulses. And he's got these huge abrasions on the back of his thigh. So, you say, let's call the trauma code. It was already called before the patient got there. So the trauma code is called, you notice the vitals, the hypertension, the bradycardia, the pupillary response, the labored breathing, the head injury. So you're concerned for maybe he's going to herniate. So we decided to start 3% normal saline, and after everything got packaged, we whisked him away to CAT scan. Now this is where all the money is going to be, so let's look at these images. So this is the first image. You can see a lot of edema, basement along the south side. Next, you can see here a little intracranial hemorrhage. There's a few punctate intracranial hemorrhages throughout. Here you can see a subdural that goes for a few slides. Midline shift about 4 to 5 millimeters. Here's a subarachnoid in the Sylvian fissure. And here you can see a little bit of air in the right orbit, a couple fractures, and lastly, air fluid level in the maxillary sinus. So he's got a bunch of facial fractures and almost every type of bleed except the epidural. Gets straight to the OR, gets a craniotomy, and they put in an EVD, and then he gets admitted to the SICU. Day 11, tracheostomy. Day 17, EVD removal. And today's day 27. He's still in the SICU. I know Perkowitz had him for a long time. I didn't get a chance to go up there and see his mental status, but and I don't know if any of the surgeons can comment, but they're still talking in terms of GCS score. So I'm not really thinking his mental status is too great. I think they're still trying to feed him puree and stuff. So I mean, it was a pretty bad case. So let's begin with part one of the discussion on traumatic brain injuries. So let's talk about a little bit of the pathophysiology. So you get the primary injury, so at the macroscopic level, you can get shearing of the axons and the white matter, and you can get destruction of a lot of the tracts, and you can see a lot of this on neuroimaging. You get the focal contusions, you get the coup and the contra coup injuries. Hematomas, it could be intraaxial or extraaxial. So these are all your subarachnoids and intracranials and all these other injuries that our patient had. Diffuse swelling is also one of the things that you can notice on our patient. So this happens immediately, and then later you get what's called secondary injury, and that's something you want to try to avoid and try to minimize as best as you can. So you get all these neurotransmitters that can get released and cause excitotoxicity in the cells. Free radical formation that is also very toxic to the cells. Calcium will influx into the cells, which will cause destruction. You can get vasospasm of the arteries, which will then cause secondary ischemia. You can get mitochondrial damage, gene activation, diffuse swelling, various other things, but these are the main ones I want to talk about. ICP, so normal is about 15 millimeters of mercury, abnormal is greater than 20. And what really makes this up, we have regulatory mechanisms. So the brain is a little bit different than the rest of the body for pressures because it's encased in a hard skull that doesn't really give much give at all. So what's in it is we got brain matter, we got the CSF, and we got the blood. And that makes up the pressure. Now you've got a little bit of room for autoregulation. Blood and CSF can go in and out of the system to increase and decrease pressure. So if I'm coughing or laughing or sneezing, you'll get variations in the pressure. However, let's say something comes in and perturbs the pressure. You get like a mass, you get a bleed. These autoregulations could be quickly overtaken. So I have a graph here that shows at first you have this compensation phase where you can increase the volume briefly and you won't get an increase in the intracranial pressure. However, as you notice here, as you overtake these mechanisms, because there's not a lot of give in the skull, you get an exponential rise in the pressure. So this is an important concept because this kind of explains why our patients who are with traumatic bleeds or something will decompensate really, really quickly. Oh, he was awake, he was talking, he was fine. Then bam, he's comatose and we're trying to intubate really quickly. Because maybe he was auto-regulating briefly, but that quickly got overtaken and it's a short period before he starts herniating and loses his brain center reflexes. Cushing triad has been a marker for increased ICP. We recognize it by hypertension, bradycardia, some sort of abnormal respiration mechanics. They're not fully sure why these happen, but they think it's related to compression of the brainstem, which leads to these mechanisms, but it's not fully understood. There's different scoring systems I think is important to memorize, but the most important that we're all familiar with is GCS, where they look at eye, verbal, and motor. It's out of 15. Best is 1 in each category, so minimum score of 3. This is easy to look up. It's the language that most neurosurgeons and neurologists and surgeons use in discussing these kinds of injuries, so you should be aware of it. 4 points for eye, 5 for verbal, and 6 for motor. Okay. There's another score I kind of read about, which I thought was interesting. I wouldn't spend a lot of time focusing on it, but just be aware that it exists. They thought that there was issues with GCS, and this might fix them. One of which being GCS is difficult for intubated patients. You can't really get a verbal response from them. And GCS doesn't include really any brainstem reflexes like abnormal respirations or pupillary response. So they think this might help alleviate giving us an idea of any brainstem injury or subtleties in the neurologic exam. And there was some papers I came across that may see that this might have better indication for prognosis. But this is brand new. No one really knows about it. So I wouldn't really focus on it unless you hear someone say the fourth score. So let's get on to traumatic brain injury. So a little bit about it. There's about 1.4 to 10 million Americans that suffer from traumatic brain injury each year. It's a lot of people. Male to female ratio. I've seen it as low as 2, as high as 4.5 men to female. So it's a lot more predominant in men population. It's usually occupational related or alcohol related. But I did notice in females there was a lot more intentional, like suicide, and so the success rate and mortality is higher. Ages are usually, late 20s, early 30s. I guess, 60s, 70s aren't on top of the skyscrapers like our Dr. Ahern. Okay, so let's talk about different causes. So this is a graph that looks by age at the different causes. As you can see at the top, a majority of the time we just don't know why they had the traumatic brain injury. You can see it's 42%, almost half. And then for adults, we're looking at on top of cars or lorries or moving trucks or on top of buildings. Whereas kids, like you would imagine, it's in the house stuff, so on top of staircases or on top of furniture. So I thought it was very interesting to look at just how high a fall should be to what mortality you'd get. So looking at mortality by height, you see, let's say a kid's playing on like a flagpole or something. So this is about 2 meters. I saw a study that looked at 2 meters or greater having a mortality of 1.2%. And then about 1 story, so maybe he's on top of the awning or on the scaffold or something, that could be 4.9% mortality. And this was actually a study done here at Kings County by Tom Scalea. I'll talk a little bit more about it later. And then greater than 6 meters, this is 2 stories, so maybe on top of this 2-story or the scaffolding, it's a higher mortality of 22.7%. You can also talk about falls from heights by stories. Generally, 1 story is 3 meters. And if you've ever heard the LD50 of traumatic brain injury, so that means the lethal height that will kill 50% of people to jump off of is about 4 to 5. So this was one study that I like the graph. You can see a mortality of 50%, it's between 4 and 5 stories. So this was corroborated by a few other studies that I saw. I did notice that the Kings County study that Tom Scalea did had lower mortalities. However, they did not include out-of-hospital deaths. So if a majority of people who fell 10 stories died at the scene, then they didn't get included in those numbers. But these numbers did include death at the scene, and so that's why we're seeing the LD50 of 4 and 5 stories. So this is important just when you're getting the history to kind of get a sense. That's why our charts say, falls from greater than this, or 2 times the height, or this many stories, or whatever, because it plays into the mortality. Falls over time. So of the people who do die, 70% will die out of hospital that we won't see. So that's a pretty high rate. But this is the more important thing I want to show you. So the ones who do make it to the hospital who die, a majority die in the first 24 hours versus the next 24 hours. What does this mean for us? This means that traumatic brain injury is an ED. We're the ones who are really saving it because it's us and the surgeons who intervene right away. But the first few actions that we do as a group is the most important because if they can make it past that 24 hours, then their chances of mortality is very low. So Dr. Jane's going to talk about management, blood pressure management, herniation, prevention, airway, all this stuff. This is a big deal, and we really make a difference. That's what I really wanted to stress in this slide. This is an interesting slide, just looking at falls by impact. So you can imagine if you hit a hard surface versus soft surface, it makes a difference. Here you can see hard is almost double soft. And then looking at the body surface, if you hit either your head or your chest, it's the highest mortality than if you landed on your extremities or if you landed on your side or your back. So knowing how he hit and looking at the injury distribution will help you understand the mortality. So this was the study done here at Kings County, Tom Scalia. They looked at 160 people who fell. They looked at the different heights. They looked at the distribution of injuries. And they calculated the mortality. And theirs was on the lower side, like 23%, but they didn't include the out-of-hospital deaths. And maybe we're just that much better at saving lives here. Or maybe our patients are that much harder heads. I don't know. But these are the patients that had the head injuries only that I took out. And we just looked at the distribution of the injuries from the head injuries. So a majority of the patients didn't, they landed with head injury, but they didn't have any injury. The biggest injury pattern was contusion or edema, followed by skull fracture. And then of the bleed, subarachnoid bleed was the highest percent. So when I was looking a lot at falls and injuries, I couldn't help but take a look at the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm from California. Tons of data on falls and injuries come from this famous bridge because it's well known worldwide to be the romantic place to go and try to commit suicide. So there's a plethora of data, and I thought there was just a lot of good information here. Just understanding briefly about this. From 1937 to 2012, there have been 1,600 bodies recovered from the bay. So this is a lot of people, and there's roughly a calculated 2% survival rate. So all the people they know jumped, and they looked at the body count, they calculated about 2%. That's not very good. So the fall distance is about 250 to 260 feet, and just to get a rough idea, so this is the Transamerican Pyramid building that's famous in San Francisco, and that height is about 2/3 that height. So if you jump 2/3 from that height, that's roughly the height of the Golden Gate Bridge. They did some fancy calculations that are above me. It takes 3 to 4 seconds to hit, and you hit at this high velocity. This was an interesting graph, I thought. It's looking at the number of patients who died over time. And does it really look like we're reducing that number? If anything, it might be increasing. And even though they're putting nets and they're putting signs and they're putting phones that say, call us if you think you jump. Right? So I thought this was just an interesting slide. Looking at the distribution of injuries, massive pulmonary contusions, pneumothorax, a lot of chest traumas, rib fractures, penetrating the lungs, penetrating the heart, intra-abdominal injuries. Not a lot of head injuries. I think it's because you kind of have to like jump and clear this net, and you're more likely to jump forward. But if you're like accidental injuries in like a scaffolding falls or you're drunk, maybe you're more likely to go down head first. I don't know. But they didn't see a lot of head injuries. And the last thing I want to talk about, I read a lot in the psychiatry literature, talking to survivors or talking to people who were thinking about it, and just hearing stories and documentaries and stuff. And just the way they talk about it, it's like romantic, it's a godly, it's beautiful, it's peaceful, it's like painless, it's perfect, there's no other way. Like they talk about people who travel from other countries just to come here because that's the place. I always thought, cool, and I go to the wharf and I get one of those, clam chowder balls. I never thought, ooh, beautiful romantic suicide. Okay, so that's the first part of the section. I'm going to welcome here Dr. Jane, and then we'll